So whenever we get started, we are recording. Never mind.
Yeah, I just did it.
Okay, perfect. Hi, folks. So welcome. We're still going to wait just a couple more minutes for a few more folks to come in. Well, actually, I don't know. Did you want to get started already and just have folks come in as they? It is recorded, so we can get started. I don't want to delay you any further for your presentation, Kevin. It's good with you to get started?
Yeah, I'm fine to get started. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending our webinar about managing elementary school related stress during the COVID-19 pandemic. On behalf of the Ridgewood Public Library, we are very happy to welcome local psychologist, Dr. Kevin Giangrasso. Welcome back, Kevin, to address your questions.
Thanks for having me.
And lead our webinar. If you have any additional questions, you're welcome to submit them in the Q&A feature. This webinar is being recorded, so after tonight's program, the recording will be emailed to you. So if you have any questions or would like to contact Dr. Giangrasso directly, we will provide the email address at the very end. So without further ado, we present Dr. Kevin Giangrasso. Yeah.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, no, it's great to be back, and it's great to do another one of these talks. We're going to talk about elementary school aged children tonight, and stress, anxiety, and worry as it relates to that population of children. As we go on with this presentation tonight, I'm going to try to make it as collaborative as possible on Zoom, and I'll, throughout I'll try to prompt questions, comments, and just participation from the folks that are watching. So please feel free to use that. And the goal of that is I want this to address the concerns and the questions that people who are watching the webinar have. So if you could right now, just to test the chat function, make a comment at chat box to just say working, so that you find where the chat box is, and we can kind of problem solve any issues that come up. Working, thank you. Okay, great. Getting some messages in. So you can feel free to put questions or comments in there as we go along. Now that you see how to use it, so please keep that handy. Okay, working, thank you. We got at least a few. Great. Okay. And then the next prompt, and this is, please do write it in the chat box, but also think about it a little bit. Answer the following prompt. When I say elementary school student, what is the first word or words that come to mind for you? And I'll sort of read them out if we get cute. That's perfect. Thank you. Child. Yeah, absolutely. So this is an age group where we're talking about children, and there's a wide range of developmental stages that happen during the elementary school years, but they are all by definition children. Small and impressionable. Yes, absolutely. So those are some of the comments we had so far. So cute, child, small, and impressionable. And boy, what does that pull for when we think about small, cute, impressionable children? We want to protect them, and we want to make sure that they have everything that they need, and that nothing is damaging or nothing is hurting them. And we're also at this time living in this period, this year that has thrown at us all kinds of unforeseen problems, right? And COVID-19 is first on the list. So I think as we talk about this age group and these children that we're going to be addressing, we want to talk about, we want to talk and think about them through a developmental lens. And by a developmental lens, I mean, some of the issues that I'm going to bring up in the webinar today are not unique to children. You know, we're going to be talking about stress, anxiety, and worry. And there is not a person alive who doesn't experience some level of stress, or some level of worry, or some anxiety related to a certain topic or situation. But when we talk during this conversation tonight, I want to really look at that anxiety, worry, and stress through a developmental lens. So I want to think about how small, young, impressionable, cute children process that same, those same pieces of information in a stressful way. And the goals for tonight are to share in 3 areas. The first is knowledge. So I'm going to share some information about children of these ages, some about stress and anxiety. I'm going to define some terms, but I also want to use this as an opportunity to start to talk in such a way that we are actively, we're thinking about the ways that we're thinking. So we're considering the processes that we're going through when we're working on problem solving something for our students or our children. And we'll kind of get through that, get at that a little bit more. But the first example of that is looking at stress and anxiety through a developmental lens. That's a very particular way of thinking about stress. And it is also the way that you can help yourself to sit in the shoes of the young individual you're trying to support, and better help them if you understand their stage of development and therefore how they process anxiety, stress, and worry. I also hope to share some skills, some actionable skills. In other words, some things that you can do that will help you support, if you're a parent, support your child. If you're maybe your teacher attending this, to support your student. If you're a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt, to support that elementary school child you care about. Developmentally, elementary school, like in the same way that middle school is, in the same way that high school is, it's a very wide range of development. So a 5 or a 6-year-old developmentally is very different than an 11-year-old. There are different skills and abilities that emerge at these different ages. And so I want to just hit on a couple bullet points within a couple age ranges that all fall within elementary school. So the young elementary school students, ages about 5 to 7, they are likely to very much copy adults. They're very likely to really aim to please and want to cooperate and share with their peers. They like to play alone, but this is a time when friendship is becoming increasingly important. They're starting to really make those connections and make friends for themselves. So it's like a little bit different than parent organized play date or something that is not really, it's more of, this is my friend. I want to make friends with this person or that person. They can also understand cognitively, they can start to understand commands that have 3 separate instructions. So please go downstairs, pick up the book, then bring it into the other room and give it to your father, right? That's probably 4 separate instructions, but they cognitively can understand and hold that in their memory to to be able to do three different things that they're asked to do. Middle range of ages, between about 8 and 9 years old or so, they start to understand the concept of space. They can start to use tools more effectively. They become more graceful with their physical movements. They start to like competition and playing games. They might want to start wanting to win in those types of games. And they start to be friends with children of the opposite gender. Girls and boys start to play together a little bit more. And I think that's it's important to recognize. The other thing that, as I'm talking, I realized I didn't say about developmental lens is that development happens within a range. I think we all know this. We know this when we watch groups. So there easily could be 2 9-year-olds in front of you, and they're both within a normal range of development across in certain areas, but they have widely different abilities within those areas. So to go back, there might be 2 6-year-olds. When you look at the bullet point of cooperates and shares, there are 2 6-year-olds who are both cooperating at very different levels, but they are both within the range of development that is considered quote typical. Actually, let's use the chat function again. What I just said about range of within a range of development, does that, please comment yes if that makes sense or makes sense in the chat box. Yes, okay, thank you, appreciate it. And in the opposite way, if I start to share a concept or it doesn't, something, the way I'm saying it doesn't make sense, please just type in a chat and I'll try to clarify. In elementary school, so the older elementary school students, like let's say around ages 10 to 12, they might start to be more likely to start to have a best friend. And friends become increasingly important. And this is sort of a developmental setup for middle school where friends start to become the most important thing. They may have increased interest in the opposite gender. They might start to be able to cognitively write a story, think of a story and actually put it down on the page in an effective way. And reading skills are increasing. For the chat box at this point, or something that we're not, we should shift. Okay. Themes for tonight, things that I want to make sure to address. So when we're talking about stress in particular, stress can be toxic when we are in an environment where there's a global pandemic and there's a lot of anxiety around a number of things, and we are doing the daily tasks in a very different way, but at this point that's starting to feel normal. It's important that just, as you would on a plane, or as you're instructed to do on a plane, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first. So as caretakers, we have to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of the children in our care. It's not because we're more or less or important in any different way. It's just because if we don't take care of ourselves, we're going to pass on the stress, and we're not going to be able to be there as much for our children. And also it's practicing and modeling good mental health. And along those lines, there's a difference between modeling for children mastery, which would mean basically modeling for the child that we have the answer and we need to bestow that answer upon, on the child. Instead, we want to be, actually, the recommendation is to be pretty open, even at the elementary school level, when we're having trouble. Now, with this age group, we want to balance that with a sense of security. And so we don't want to share difficulties that we're having to such an extent that it's scary to our children. But we actually do want to make sure that they know that we do not have the answers. And the teaching opportunity in that is to teach that we don't have the answers, but we are doing our best to figure them out. And we're doing our best to focus, to cope as we're doing that. So we want to model coping. When we talk about stress and anxiety, we're also talking about distress tolerance. And so tolerate the tough moments. The recommendation here is that we don't try to pretend. We want to acknowledge that there are difficult times, and we want to acknowledge that there's stress going on. But we want to also acknowledge that we're working and doing our best to tolerate that, to get through it, and to help it to be a little bit less intense when and where we can. Routine drift. This is a concept of when our routines start to fall apart a little bit because we are not sticking to them, or they slowly drift into something that we don't have as much control over. That's something, it's normal. It's not bad, but it's something we want to notice and try to correct or shift routines in the household so that they go back to what makes most sense and what meets the needs of our children. And overall, I think this might be the most important concept. Kids are resilient. Kids can handle a lot. And in fact, the norm is for children to be exposed to difficulty, stress, and anxiety. And sometimes just knowing that we are built with that ability to tolerate distress and be resilient in our lives, it helps us to help our children. Any questions at this point? Okay. So I'm going to skip some of this. I'm just going to address the first bullet point. It's the concept of our diet. So our diet, not just in terms of nutrition, which nutrition is very important, but our diet of information, our diet of physical activity, our opportunities to be in the outdoors, and our opportunities to be doing things that we enjoy just for ourselves. That is as true for elementary school children as it is for adults. Sleep is bolded and underlined because it's probably the most important thing on that list. And so sleep routines, good quality sleep hygiene is absolutely a priority. There's 2 points that on this slide that I haven't addressed yet, and I want to talk about them a little bit. It's the first and the third. So number 1, grief. This is a time when we are all, I believe, as a society, going through a period of grief. We are, in some cases, losing loved ones or have lost loved ones. We've lost experiences. We've lost the sense of having opportunities, and we've lost social connection. All of these things are very important to us as people, and they're just as important to children as they are for adults. And so children sometimes benefit from the opportunity to be validated in that grief. So a perfect example might be not being able to go in person to school every day, to have to do, a different schedule, right? That gives a lot less opportunity to see friends. There might be a sense of loss there. And we don't always, we can't predict how someone's going to feel when they experience that loss. And that's true that's very true of young kids. We don't want to make assumptions about how they feel. And I think, especially when we think about young children, we think about them as, cute, impressionable, just young. We inadvertently sometimes put our own thoughts of what we believe they're feeling, or what we would expect them to feel in certain situations. For a 6-year-old child, what they're concerned about, or what they're grieving the loss of, might be completely different than what we imagine they're grieving. And it might seem, in our world or our perspective, it might present to us as like it's cute, like what they're sad about, or it's kind of silly. But when we're looking at that through a developmental lens, we can understand that actually, to him or her, that actually is the most important thing. And we want to kind of make sure we're recognizing that. And when we think about how they're reacting and what interpretations we're making of that, we want to understand that it's just as important to them as something else is to us, and we want to treat it that way. Okay. So we had some questions come in from everybody who registered, and I want to kind of go through them a little bit, and hopefully this may prompt a little bit of discussion on the chat feature. If it doesn't, that's fine, but this is a really good time to kind of just write out a question that occurs to you, or even a comment that occurs to you as I'm going through these questions. So this first question, I'll read it, and then I'm gonna respond to it a little bit. What are some long-term effects that we may see with children who will be doing virtual learning like this? And I think, I don't think it was written in the question, but I'll add, virtual learning like this for so long. So I am of the belief that the impacts that we can expect to see children are going to be are short term, right? That resiliency and the ability for people to tolerate difficult times, and through development grow from that and away from that, is much stronger than the impact of a year or two of mostly virtual learning. So I would say, population-wide, I don't think we're going to see many long-term effects. In other words, I don't think that there is going to be the fear of having a generation of kids who, read at a lower reading level than they would have without the pandemic, or as a result of virtual learning. I don't think it holds up. That fear holds up, and I think it's actually a really good exercise for us to talk back to some of those thoughts, or unhelpful thoughts, that we might have about what if, the what ifs of what might happen to children. Now, I do think that there are some significant short-term impacts that doing so much virtual learning has. And primarily, as you'd imagine, it's the impact in making social connections and social skills. And that's as a result of there's less opportunity for social interaction. And at this age, this is really, as we saw in some of those earlier bullet points, this is really the time when children are starting to be more interested and more able to make and keep friends. And so if with so much virtual learning, there just isn't that same opportunity. And the ways that many times we're having kids connect with others, there are certain barriers in the interaction, whether that means there are masks on, or whether that means it's more of like FaceTime calls or video related, video based connection. That's different because the nonverbals, or the things that we read in each other's faces to understand how we need to respond in order to make that connection, they're different. When we're wearing a mask, we can't see, the child can't see the other child's smile, or we can't see the full set of facial reactions that they make. And so as a result, some of the skills don't develop in the same way, or I'd imagine that some of the skills don't develop in the same way. Now, at the same time, if we go back to understanding development to happen along a range, it makes sense that some of those impacts will be short term, and kids will very much catch up. So, I mean, I guess that's my answer to the question, is that, yeah, in the short term, you might see your children having some difficulties with social interactions, or more distress around in-person events. But I would encourage you to focus on resilience and have the mindset of growth long term, as opposed to short-term worry. At the same time, when we look at the short term, it makes sense that we want to provide as many opportunities as we can to compensate for that lack of in-person interaction. And I think that overall, parents and schools and teachers are doing their absolute best to figure those things out. And I've actually been really amazed at what we've seen adults do to help foster those social connections and development. And so, and one of those things is, as we have learned more and more about the virus, and we want to certainly mitigate risk whenever we can, there are certain things that we can do to create in-person opportunities for children, but with relatively low risk. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. I'll come back to some of these other questions in a minute. I want to hit, there was one question on here that I wanted to make sure that I talked about. And that is, what do we say? How can we explain what is happening? So this is the same question that's come up I've heard it a lot, and so I wanted to make sure to address it today. And it's come up in every presentation that I've done here with the library. There's no 100% right answer to this, and the answer to this question has very much changed as the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic, has lasted longer and longer. I would advocate, even for 6-year-old child that they are that I would urge adults to share honestly some of what is happening. Now, the details of how widespread this is and some of the worst outcomes from COVID and that sort of thing are certainly not necessary and probably wouldn't even be understood. But the idea that there is an illness that many people have caught, that there are certain things that we do to stay safe, that specifically what your family plan is around managing risk related to COVID are all very important things that any elementary school child should understand and be talked to openly about. Families have decided to do different levels of isolation and a variety of different approaches to managing risk over the last months. But that's no different than different decisions that that different families make all the time. The recommendation here is that there is an honest and open dialogue where questions that children have can be answered, and that there is a set of values that your decisions and choices about family choices, the choices that you're making as a family are based in solid values that you all can you can rely on and trust. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Comments, concerns? Does this all make sense? Is there anything that is particularly that's a good question. I'll ask that question. If you could please comment in the comment box with one point or one idea that we've talked about tonight that kind of is sitting in your mind or is of note. In other words, something that you're that triggered some thought. Okay. Oh, thank you. That kids, so I just heard from one person saying that kids are resilient and this won't have much, if any, long-term impact. Great, thank you. Okay. As I keep going, please feel free to put something in the chat box of, that's just sticking with you or is of note. So I've referred to these three terms a number of times so far tonight. And I think it's important that we define them and use them to understand the topic overall. So the terms are anxiety, worry, and stress. So there's a difference between anxiety and stress, and that is the following. Stress is the description of what happens to someone when there's an identifiable stressor. So in other words, we know that it's stress when the thing that's causing the stress goes away, the stress also goes away. So if it's, for a child is nervous about going to a new friend's backyard, and they've never been there before, and they're a little bit nervous to be around other kids, or they're nervous to be around other adults. that's a stressor. That's something that's creating stress for that child. When that event is over, if that feeling goes away, then we know it's stress. Anxiety describes the experience that when the stressor goes away, but the feeling is still there, that we call anxiety. So those are two different things. The physiological reactions and some of the types of thinking that happen when someone is anxious are the same as what happens when someone is stressed. But the difference is one tends to go away when the stressor goes away and the other doesn't. Now, worry is the description for the cognitive experience or the thoughts associated with stress or anxiety. So typical worries are the what ifs. What if this doesn't work out? Or what if we don't, as an adult, what if there isn't a vaccine? The thoughts that are, I would call them some thoughts that are helpful and other thoughts that are unhelpful. And there's different terms for those different types of thoughts, but worry thoughts are those thoughts that are that increase anxiety or increase stress. So that's worry. It's the cognitive experience. When we're specifically when we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about a lot of different things. There are specific anxiety around certain situations, people, places, or things. There's generalized anxiety where someone has anxiety around a lot of different experiences, people, or places. There's also related experiences that don't quite fit under the umbrella of anxiety, but are very related to it. Compulsive behavior or more intrusive or perseverative thinking that are related, but probably don't fall under that same umbrella. Anxiety is the most common of childhood mental disorders. So that is something that is important to know, because when we acknowledge that, we know that anxiety, there's a lot of anxiety. It's very common for children of all different ages to experience anxiety. And it's probably, I'd imagine it's a little bit more common for that to come out right now because the whole world is a little bit more anxious. So someone also commented, it's comforting to think of the effects of this as short-term and helping to build resiliency. Yes. That's great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. Great. We've got some more comments coming in, so I'll address them as they do. Okay. So the next comment, the question I heard was, could you talk about strategies to encourage your kids to do their best work, not just get it done for a fourth grader? Yes, absolutely, I can. Let's just see if I. Yeah, so I'm going to try to address how to help motivate children to do their best work, to really put their best foot forward with assignments in a couple different ways. So I'll come at it from 2 or 3 different directions. So the first is when we're talking about motivation. So a lot of times we think about motivating children as something that you either have or you don't have. So that, my child just isn't motivated right now. And then we start thinking about all the reasons why they might not be motivated or they might be having trouble. But at its core, we're thinking about this as something that, this is like motivation is like a skill set, or like an inherent quality, even actually an inherent quality that they either have or they don't have, and it comes and goes, and they have no control over it, and we have little control over it. That actually couldn't be farther from the truth. Motivation is probably, in my opinion, it's important and it's exciting when we feel like we see a motivated to do their best work, but it comes from somewhere, and often it comes from the less interesting sort of concepts of habit, routine, rewards and punishments, those things that are not about the task itself but surround the task. And so in other words, success, or like highly motivated child doesn't come out of nowhere. Usually it comes out of failure, or it comes out of the experience of maybe having some trouble on a certain topic or a certain subject, but really all of a sudden figuring it out and feeling really good about that. And then that serves as fuel for the next assignment. And so sometimes when we're, especially at elementary school age, right, we are working with a child who is not, who just seems like they just want to get it done and be over with it because they want to just go on to the next thing. It means they're undervaluing the assignment itself. This for whatever reason, in their fourth grader mind, they do not see this as important or connected with something that's important. And so the recommendation is to, instead of trying to force them or push them to do their best, to actually say less and surround them with things that motivate them more. So this could be some examples. Might be connecting with another experience. And so if you're having a lot of difficulty with math, for example, to try to, instead of focusing on the math worksheet, focus on the concepts and focus on helping them to understand something that they didn't understand, and experience that that sense of achievement that comes from like getting it, and then go back to the assignment. Another way to do this, it's a little bit probably more workable even, is behaviorally. And so when we think about behaviorism, we think about a specific behavior. So in this case, putting your best foot forward on an assignment. We think about what happens before that behavior and what happens after that behavior. So what happens before it is the antecedent, and what happens afterwards is the consequence. The antecedent is where we can make the most change. Before they even start to do that worksheet is when we start to prompt them and set them up for doing that worksheet. And one of the best ways to do that is when a child is in a slightly uncomfortable situation, they can relieve that worry or get through it by doing the assignment. In other words, you can't make anybody do anything, but you can make it a little bit more likely that they put forth more effort. Sometimes when a child is not putting their best effort into something, it's because they don't see the value, and they are maybe bored, or they're maybe not connecting it with what they think is important. And so figuring out creative ways to do that for them is one way to motivate them to work harder or to put their best effort into the assignment. And please write in the chat box if any of that was helpful, made sense, or if any of it didn't make sense. I'm happy to try to clarify and maybe use some other examples. The other thing, and the other way I might approach a situation where a fourth grader is not putting their best effort into the assignment is to look around the assignment. And so what else is going on for your child that may be making them feel maybe not that great? Maybe they're feeling low, maybe they're feeling bored generally, because you know, some guesses as to why would be like they feel like they're not able to go out and play with their friends as much as they would like to, or they really are stuck on all they want to do is play video games, or it seems like all they want to do is play video games even, maybe, or they want to they're interested in other things, or maybe they're sad. And someone who's sad is typically not very motivated to do their work. And so sometimes if you can address those other things that surround the work, all of a sudden you can see more effort, and actually the child starting to feel better about doing the assignment when you actually didn't address the assignment itself at all. You just saw a little bit differently what their experience was and were able to help cope with whatever else was going on that was then trickling into the work. Is that helpful? Make sense? Please feel free to let me know. Okay. Let's see what else we've got here. Okay, thanks for putting in that extra information. So what I see in the chat box is a gifted student who's breezing through with little effort. So that's sort of that's a different, the term I would use is different conceptualization. So maybe there's understanding what's going on. Maybe they're bored. He or she is bored, or is feeling like not completely fulfilled with the assignment. And so that's a little bit of a different situation. Okay. So we have about a little over 5 minutes left, and one of the things that I like to cover, to make sure to cover in these presentations, is answering the question of when should you be concerned? We can talk about stress and anxiety and ways to manage these things. We also, I think it's helpful to have a template to use to understand when some of these difficulties cross over from the line between typical range to a more clinical range, or needing professional support or professional assessment. So I think I'll spend a few minutes talking about that now. So for children, for young children, for elementary school children, a couple yellow or red flags that you may see, that not necessarily meaning that if you see these things, you need to seek out support and professional support immediately, but these are things that you should take note of and watch. So these are qualitative changes in the way they're sleeping. So problem sleeping. So this could be not sleeping a lot, sleeping more, sleeping less, or sleeping less restfully, or waking up and still being tired. Problems eating. So child who was very interested in food and becomes less so, or starts to be increasingly picky about the food that they eat in a way that is qualitatively different than they've ever been before. If they start to talk about being worried about themselves or about loved ones in a way that that worries you. Relatedly, if the child seems sad, withdrawn, or isn't playing as much, or isn't interested in play in a way that they used to be, those are all, I would call them like yellow or red flags to be aware of and to potentially seek support. Things you can do to help support children when you do start some of those things in the previous slide, making sure that you keep your bedtime routine, read, use some skills, some basic skills like deep breathing or relaxation exercises, making sure to trying to eat meals together, to allow your child to be part of family-based decision making, choosing what you're, even like little things like choosing what you're eating or choosing what activities you're doing during time off, can be really helpful. And giving, instead of giving all of the choices in the world, giving 2 or 3 choices that they can pick from. Helping to prepare meals. Those are really good times for the family members to connect and for young children to feel safe and cared for. You do want to, at this age, you want to make sure you're reassuring your child, making sure that they know that that the home is a safe place and they can talk and ask about anything they want to, and you're there for them. Behavioral activation is a very simple but very helpful technique, and that is basically what behavioral activation is scheduling and engaging in positive activities. So activities that you would predict are going to make you feel good, schedule them in to your child's life so that they have those opportunities to connect, to feel good, to feel confident, because those things are in and of themselves, those are their medicine. Those are some things you could do. And then if some of these things do become a concern and continue to be a concern, seeking a professional brief or some support can be very helpful with children as young as 5 or 6. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you for everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. I think we're right at about 8 o'clock. So if there are, if anybody has 1 or 2 questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I think we'll end it there. Take a look in the chat box. You're welcome. Thank you everybody for having me. And as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Kevin. We will be sending the recording to the registered patrons. So again, thanks so much for everything.
You're welcome. Absolutely. I wish everybody a lot of luck during this difficult time, and keep at it, and we'll get through it together.
Have a great night.